another big game revealed at the Game Awards 2024. The new one from Naughty Dog, Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. We had an announcement trailer, which seems to be a combination of cinematics but they are saying captured on PlayStation 5. Looks interesting, a complete departure from The Last of Us. Oliver, you were right. They are indeed doing a sci-fi game.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking that they would be banking on another Last of Us entry, but here we are, new IP. I'm going to go to you first on this one, actually, Oliver. What do you think?
Oh boy, yeah, I'd love a new Last of Us entry for sure. You're really tempting me there, but I mean, this looks phenomenal to me. I think this looks really great. I was watching this live and I didn't know what to expect at all, but as soon as they pulled up on that close-up of the main character right at the beginning, I knew it was a Naughty Dog title because the stylization of that character, everything about her, it just looks so much like The Last of Us Part 2. She looked just like a WLF troop from that game. If you kind of pulled them out of that game into this one, increase the fidelity a little bit, you're kind of getting that appearance there. But I think this looked outstanding. And in part, that's because this looks kind of achievable to me. The game is coming out for PS5 consoles initially. But there's some interesting technology that I think we're looking at here.
Oh, yeah.
The first thing that stood out to me was I think we're getting ray traced reflections here. The opening shot in the mirror actually is probably not an example of RT reflections, I would think, just based off the high detail level and accuracy and coherency in that reflection. And it's also a flat reflection, which makes it a lot easier. But throughout the rest of the piece, you can see all kinds of little reflections of the main character in her coffee cup and monitors and glass. And then at the very end, there's a shot that would kind of be impossible if you were just relying on screen space reflections. Of course, Naughty Dog does like to use planar reflections in their games, which I think is what's being used for the mirror there in that first scene. So it is possible that they're using planar reflections for these shots instead. But in a game with reflective detail that looks reasonably consistent and extensive like this, you'd usually expect that to be more ray tracing based. But yeah, I mean, I think the art here, the character rendering, all the small scale detail in the ship cockpit, it looks beautiful. This is a small scale scene for the most part, but I think it looks fantastic. And the other part of it that's very interesting is that it's running at 60 FPS locked, pretty much here. Mm-hmm. And it's subjectively, like I put my face right up next to the screen, and it subjectively looks pretty 4K like here. That's really surprising. I don't know that we have confirmation on this, and I really don't know if it is real time or not, or if it's offline.
No, they usually are very good about, they say in-game cinematics captured on PS5. Okay. And Sony's been very good about specifically spelling out what's real time or not in that way.
Yeah, I mean, if it is real time, that's extremely impressive because it's a 4K like image, not much aliasing. That would be really impressive, especially at this early stage in development. If this was to be running in real time, it looks to me though this looks like very plausible. Like you look at this and there's nothing to me that says this is not going to run into PS5. It looks like something that could run into PS5. PS5 at 60 FPS with this image quality though, that seems very, very impressive. I'm sort of reminded of that initial Uncharted 4 trailer that's so infamous. That certainly comes to mind here. But you know, even if it's not quite at this level of pristineness, the idea that we would get something like this on a PlayStation 5, I think it still looks fantastic, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it.
Interesting. Yeah, plausibility. I mean, you're right. They're the masters of actual transparency. You know, they always tell you what you're going to get in a trailer, which I think is very, very laudable. Is there any potential get-outs here? I mean, you know, in-game cinematics captured on PS5. Well, if they're saying it's captured on PS5, I'd say it's not captured from PS5 Pro, because if it was, they'd say so. In-game cinematics, though, it could be a pre-rendered video sequence. If you go back in the day to the way Naughty Dog used to do their cutscenes, they were, you know, video based, but they were basically engine renders that were dumped frame by frame.
Don't believe that they would go back to that, Rich. I'd say there's like a 0% chance of that. They've gone past that. And from what I understand, one of the main reasons they did that on PS3 as well was specifically to overcome loading issues to keep the game seamless.
Okay, well, let's talk about the segment at the end with the sword. That I'd say is obviously gameplay. I don't think you could pre-render that. Well, you could, but it would be wouldn't be a great way to present the game. It looks super, super clean, right? That scene is almost basically a statement of intent about ray tracing there.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's
The whole
so many
trailer
potential
is-
failure, so many potential failure points there for SSR. I think that's one of the reasons why it was in there, to be honest.
Yeah, you're
great.
right. Big red laser swords over water
Yes.
with SSR is a nightmare. It never looks good.
Yeah, so what can I say? I think it looks great. It does look super, super clean. The character rendering, classic Naughty Dog, but again, just looks awesome. Yeah, again, materials. I mean, what can you say? This is basically a progression of The Last of Us. A game. I guess it's their first actual game that's designed for PlayStation 5, which is quite
Correct.
remarkable, bearing in mind we're 4 years into the generation. There was no indication of when it's actually coming out, though, is there?
No.
I think they've said it's been in development for 4 years, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. There was The Last of Us Part 1, which it was kind of developed. I mean, it's a PS5
Yeah,
console exclusive, but I get what you're saying there. In terms of the underlying technology, it's not a big progression beyond The Last of Us Part 2. It's pretty comparable in a lot of respects. But I would say here that, like, I'm just glad that Naughty Dog is pushing forward with their own technology, their own look to this.
Yep.
And they might be trying some things in terms of image quality and performance that we're unlikely to see from the likes of, say, The Witcher 4 on current gen consoles as a result there. So I hope they can achieve that visual target while still sticking to those things. But I mean, to your point, Rich, this level of image quality at 60 FPS on a base PS5 in real time, I'm struggling with that to believe
Yeah,
that's
seems-
the case.
I'm
I'm struggling.
skeptical.
I'm really struggling. PS5 Pro would even be a stretch in some respects here,
Yeah.
but I think that there's something going on there that's not quite indicative of the way the final game will ship, but we'll have to see, obviously, on that one.
There's another thing you didn't mention, Oliver, that I think is worth pointing out is the shadow quality. Like, look at 307 in the trailer, and throughout they have a lot of very clean, fine self shadows on the main character all over the place, and there's just shadows all throughout the trailer. And there's no artifacting, no typical shadow map artifacts. They get very, very soft and diffuse. Like when she walks out of the room with the mirror, you see her pass like all those pictures on the wall. You get that really soft shadow from the distant light, yet the shadows from the pictures themselves are all beautifully defined, like the little needles in there, everything's super sharp right up against the wall. So like look at the you see the hole punched sheet like over her shoulder at 125, like every little hole was represented with a shadow.
Yeah.
That's not really something you can do with shadow maps normally,
No.
unless you had like there are tricks that can be done to allow really fine close proximity shadows. We've seen that before, like Final Fantasy 16 is pretty good at that, but like to do it at this scale here, that's another thing that's like, wait, is that like RT shadows
Yeah.
on top of all this? Like there's just so much going on in terms of fidelity there where you're like, huh.
That's very interesting
Yeah.
that you pointed out there. Also, at like about 106, you see that mirror and the way that it falls off away from the camera. That little mirror there looks very impressive, and also to me, one thing that sticks out too is that point of contact is super clear. Like it's not like there's a gap there, which you see with shadow maps.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly.
That's a
That's the
good
thing.
point.
It's like, so when you have all those together, it's like it's potentially doing all these ray tracing features, which would be cool to see.
Yeah.
But like it's doing all that at 60 FPS with 4K like image quality, like that just seems like a bridge too far as well, right? Like you're like, can they really do this?
Even though this is like mostly a pretty cinematic presentation, like, yeah, you're right. The consistency, quality, variable penumbra, the way there's no gap, all that
There's no
stuff.
gap.
Yeah, there's no gap. I mean, it just looks super. I mean,
I know
it does
it's
look like
perfectly rooted.
Yeah, it does look like RT shadows the more you mention it. But I'd also say that what we're seeing here, like a lot of other titles, is pretty consistent with what you get with VSMs as well, virtual shadow maps. So it could be something like that here. I'm not too sure, but it certainly could be RT shadows as well.
My guess is that we might see something similar to Uncharted 4, where the initial reveal is just a little bit higher fidelity than what actually ships, but still comparable. But in reality, like with the PS5 Pro, I went back and was loading up Uncharted 4 again, and it kind of struck me that there's still games coming out today that I think look worse than Uncharted 4. Like, I was playing through Space Marine 2, for instance, and I'm like, you know what? This game looks a lot worse than Uncharted 4 overall, despite the huge numbers of enemies. That's very cool, but like, visually speaking, and there's a bunch of games I feel like this lately where you just look at the character models, you look at the level of detail, and you're like, this doesn't actually really exceed what Naughty Dog did in 2016 on a base PS4 in a lot of ways.
And even with Uncharted 4, it's like they had a big game, big wide open gameplay spaces, really exciting chase sequences with tons of physics and crazy stuff going on everywhere. Yeah. It's like a big game. It's not like Hellblade 2 where we're like, this is a really constrained game. The visuals are incredible. This is like, the visuals are incredible. And it's like a game that if you released it today, people would be like, oh, the game is so big. There are so many exciting moments. There's so much stuff.
We go all over the world.
Go all over the world.
Tons of gameplay scenarios, like freaking the boat, the driving through the town, like just the amount of the destruction, everything going on, like doing that at that level. Like, so I would like to have a little faith in Naughty Dog here in terms of like, they do tend to surprise, and we haven't seen a PS5 game from them yet. So maybe they've really figured something out. Maybe this is still a little bit too high fidelity for what we just don't know. All I'll say is I'm just happy though that we're seeing something new from them. I think it's cool that they decide to go sci-fi. I like The Last of Us, but I'm tired of The Last of Us. I did not need another zombie game from them, like in that depressing, dark world anymore. Like, the world is dark enough these days. Like, we don't need that anymore. It's time to move on. This has a bit more of the Uncharted adventurous spirit to it. I hope. It certainly seems like it will. And also the idea of planet hopping and going to different locales. There's some interesting potential here. Plus like melee combat like that with a sword and all that, like what's that going to be? Like there's a lot of questions still. I think this could be really, really cool. And I'm happy that they got the chance to actually do it, as opposed to just like, here's more Last of Us. You will like it.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's some fighting talk there, because I think Oliver's going to hunt you down.
I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm sorry. I see that smile. Like there's
yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm gonna rip your head off after this direct.
No, I think I can restrain myself. I understand The Last of Us fatigue, even if I'm not there myself.
That's fine.
But there's only been 2 games. Well, not including the remasters and the remasters of the remaster.
There have been 5 games, really, between the 2 remasters and the 1 remake and the 2 main titles. So, yeah, but 2 games, 5 games, however you slice it, people are hoping for Naughty Dog to do something different. I'm glad they are. But I am a little bit disappointed, I will admit, that it pushes the prospect of a video game version of The Last of Us Part 3, at least, out into the 2030s, at least, probably.
The thing is, though, as well, like a sci-fi world that they've chosen here is a perfect place to use. If they've invested in these new ray tracing technologies, it's a great place to use it, right? All the shiny surfaces and materials. Like Last of Us is a very matte kind of place.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, my final thoughts on this is, well, what can I say? Obviously, a lot of people accuse us of pixel peeping and like pointing out flaws and stuff.
They get real mad about that.
And here's the thing about this trailer. I'm finding it very, very difficult to actually find any kind of artifacts or things that look wrong, glowing objects that shouldn't be glowing, hair artifacting, anything of that description, any sort of aliasing of any description. It just looks pristine from start to finish. And I think this says 2 things to me. Well, assuming this is the game and this is how it's going to present, well, what can I say? When a company gets it so right and you get a presentation that looks this clean, this good, I think anybody should be able to recognize that and recognize that this is actually a really stunning looking game. And it's kind of like where everything comes together, everything looks consistent. It's actually quite amusing that the artifacts you do see in there, like, the Huawei patterns on the screens, are actually in there by design.
Right.
So,
dude, like their CRT simulation, when they zoom into that screen, that's so good. That's really good looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the only sort of stuff that looks a bit odd is because that's actually what they're looking to achieve visually. Mm-hmm. Everything else just looks absolutely pristine and kind of real world as it should, within a sort of through the Naughty Dog kind of lens, if you see what I mean. But yeah, it's quite interesting when you were starting to talk about the shadows there, because that is usually quite an obvious failing point. And yet there they are, and they look great. So Well, it is just an announcement trailer, but they are saying it's captured on PlayStation 5. We have to take them at their word. I am getting shades of the old Uncharted 4 reveal, but at the same time, well, let's
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 find
give
out.
them a
Naughty Dog
chance.
their moment.
Give them a chance.
Absolutely.